Hi BookTube, and welcome to the third in my series of 6 degrees of book separation related to the original tag, but done in honour of the fact that my own novel comes out in July, and that of the 6 in this series, the first book in each of the chain has some influence or input into my novel, and then I trace 5 books stretching out from that, which may or may not also feed into my novel. So today starts with Ken Alder's The Measure of All Things, which I don't have because I read this in the library. And it's the story of the discovery of the metre, the unit, the metre. Because we managed to do this the wrong way round, that we knew what a metre was and we were using it for measurement, but it had never been, made universal. There was no definitive measure of a metre. So when people said something was a metre, they weren't necessarily talking about the same thing. And the real life story was 2 French sort of mathematicians and scientists set out across France and Barcelona in the middle of the French Revolution, which is a perilous occupation because the chemist Lavoisier was killed in the French Revolutionary Terror because he was seen as bourgeois, as middle class, or rather aristocratic. So off with his head. And these 2 guys, were travelling throughout revolutionary France and were challenged and stuff as to their dark purposes. And through sort of triangulating 3 points, 3 geographical points, back to Paris, they came with a sort of whole series of data to prove the unified length of the metre. And when they'd finished this task, one of them was racked thereafter that he'd made a mistake in his calculation. So it's a fascinating book. And then from there, the French had a brick with sort of 2 lines in sort of different sort of metals, and that was the standard, definitive measure of a metre. Of course, it's since then we've moved on to things like sort of live light waves and wavelengths and radioactive decay of atoms and all that sort of thing to define a metre. But that was for its time revolutionary. So that leads to the second book, which is Dana Sobel's Longitude, because a similar sort of thing happened. That the seamen, because they didn't have any sort of definitive way of sort of measuring, when all you have is an expanse of sea with no landmarks at all, just the sea and the sky. Sometimes it was very hard to know exactly where you were. And so the system we have now, sort of longitude lines marked on a map, helped sailors plot exactly where they were. But it took a long time for us to get there. And it was really only provided for by the English clockmaker. Bear in mind, sort of Victoria, whatever it was, 16th, 17th century, clockmaking, watchmaking, all the sort of fine gears and stuff. It was very much tied in with sort of seafaring and instruments for navigating the sea. So this British clockmaker, John Harrison, came up with a way of measuring longitude. And that's what Dava Sobel's book is about. But what interests me is if you take that in relation also with the Ken Alder book about how the French measured the metre, you see that the early systems of measurements, which are supposedly getting more scientific, are actually a colonial war by other means. It's the British and the French in competition with each other. So the British nabbed longitude and placed 0 degrees longitude through Greenwich, of course the heart of British naval power. And then the French managed to snaffle the metre. So they were in competition with each other as a sort of colonial competition. In my book, there is a section where a woman wants to bring down the SI, the integrated systems of units of measurement, because she says it has sort of declared war on not only women's bodies but on the planet Earth itself. If you think about how measurements started in the Bible, it's referred to as a cubit. So it's like the length of a man's forearm, which of course is not universal because people have different sort of length arms. But that sort of whole attitude of fence posts and measuring and sort of penetrating the earth and fencing it off and sort of private property and all of that is a very male penetrative way of of reacting to the earth and to women's bodies. And the character in my book is sort of wages a one woman's terrorist campaign to bring down this sort of unified system of measurement as the source of many, many evils. So that is the second book, which was Dava Sobel's Longitude. So the third book, John Harrison, Light. So John Harrison, the clockmaker who enabled Longitude, of course, John Harrison is the name of this author. So that's a sort of happy coincidence. So this is a space opera novel, which is a genre I don't really understand what are the elements of space opera, but it's a decent enough read. But the interesting thing in this novel, which again sort of ties in with my novel, is that all the laws of physics that we understand are under threat from a singularity. Now, a singularity is where you have a single dimension point. It is literally like a point, and it's felt to be at the heart of black holes. And so this book is, a singularity threatens the laws of physics, because if they could, if the logic of the singularity is true, it's sort of the opposite of infinity in a way. It will undermine all the laws of physics that are based on, the rules and precepts that we have. So that's book 3, M.John Harrison, Light. And that brings me to book 4, A Naked Singularity, Sergio de la Pava. So we've gone from the singularity that is a threat in Light to a naked singularity in this book. It's not really about physics at all. It's about the American legal system. And the start of this book is a fantastic, vertiginous plummet through the meat grinder of a New York, court system, where people who can't afford representations, the people at the bottom of the social scale, are just sort of pass through the courts and and treated like like a sausage grinder. And that's brilliantly described in here by the main character, who is a public defendant and tries to get the best possible outcome for these people. And he's never lost a case in terms of the targets he sets for each of these people. But the book starts off and he loses his first case, and it sort of sends him off in a spiral where he ends up committing a crime with a fellow lawyer. So they've turned the whole sort of moral world of the legal and justice system on its head, because now you've got sort of legal counsel committing crimes. But there's lots of elements to this book that are very entertaining, very funny. There's a lot of stuff about the middleweight boxing belt in the 80s, which had Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Wilfredo Benitez, just all these sort of great champions, and the belt kept changing hands between them. And, it's there because this guy's lost his undefeated belt as a lawyer. And it's a very, very entertaining, good read. So that is A Naked Singularity, Sergio de la Pava. And on to the 5th book, which I've unhauled because I really didn't like it, which is Roberto Bolano's 2666. Yes, that massive, thick tome of a novel. And the link there is one of the chapters is devoted to a boxing journalist who goes to Mexico to cover a fight. And to be honest, it's probably the best section in the book. It's a bit sort of Hemingway-ish, Richard Ford-ish, but it's that's a decent read. But the rest of the book, it starts off with the world of academia, which seems to be very sub-David Lodge territory. Simon Gray, as a playwright, covers all of that stuff. Of the rivalries between academics, not only in their theories and papers, but in their women, their partners. As if female academics couldn't stand in their own right. But of course, the chapter that most people talk about is the one about the relentless, remorseless description of dead women turning up in the Mexican desert near the American border. And if I could see the point of that, maybe it would have some validity. But it just seemed to be voyeurism of the worst kind, really. So that's 2666 by Roberto Bolano, which I'm not a fan of, and which does not inform my own novel, as you can probably tell. But it does bring us on to the 6th and last book in this chain, The 300 Million by Blake Butler. So the same way that Bolano is killing women after women after women, Blake the ambition of this book is I'm trying to think of the name of the main character. He's Gretch. Oh, what's his name? Gretch Gravery, who basically has started a death cult, and it's his stated ambition to kill every single citizen of the United States, hence the 300 million of the title. So it sort of echoes Bolano, but I think this is a much more successful version because there is a reason that there is a logic behind it, and the book does look at this sort of the mentality of sort of serial killers and death cults, and the unfortunate character in this book is the detective who has to interrogate Gravery after he's captured, and just how it sort of destroys his mind so much so he's not even sure what plane of existence he's on anymore. And it's a terrifying book, but if you've got the stomach for it, I would definitely say read this. So there you have it. There's the chain of 6 books. So we started off with Ken Alder's The Measure of All Thing, about the hunt for the universal metre. That led to Dava Sobel's Longitude, which was the hunt for providing navigable calculation for sailors. Then from the John Harrison, who enabled Longitude, we have M.John Harrison's Light, in which the greatest threat to physics is a singularity. Which brings us on to A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Pava, even though there aren't any real singularities in here like there are in here. And then from A Naked Singularity, and the boxing theme in that, we go to Roberto Bolano's boxing scene in 2666. And from the myriad of dead bodies and cadavers and corpses in that, we go to the 300 million by Blake Butler. So there you have it. That's my third 6 degrees of separation tag. And I hope to see you for the 4th. Thanks very much.